You've asked AI something that actually mattered. A business decision, a recommendation, something with real stakes attached to it. The answer came back clean and confident. And somewhere underneath that confidence, you thought, okay, but how did it get there? That question is more important than most people realize. And there's a one sentence fix for it. Here's the situation most people recognize. You ask AI something consequential, a real question with real consequences. And what comes back is polished, direct, and certain. No hesitation, no hedging. A response that sounds like it knows exactly what it's talking about. Confidence is easy to produce. Logic is harder. And when you can't see the logic, you have no way to evaluate whether the confidence is earned. That's the problem. A well written wrong answer and a well written right answer are identical on the surface. And the surface is all you have to work with. At the pattern level, this happens for a specific reason. AI learned from text written by humans, and humans, when they write with authority, tend not to hedge. Confident writing is statistically common in the kinds of sources the model trained on. Uncertain, qualified, well, it depends writing is less so. When AI generates a response, it's pattern matching toward the kind of writing that sounds authoritative. The output sounds certain whether the reasoning behind it is solid or not, because the training produced that tendency. Tone alone can't tell you if the logic holds. When AI gives you a direct answer, what you're looking at is the conclusion. The reasoning that produced it, the steps, the assumptions, the trade offs, that stays hidden inside the output. A flawed conclusion looks identical to a sound one. Without the reasoning visible, there's nothing to evaluate except the surface. You're reviewing the answer, not the logic that produced it. And if the logic is where something went wrong, that's exactly where you'd want to look. Chain of thought prompting addresses this. The technique is one instruction added to the end of your prompt. Ask AI to show its reasoning before giving you the answer. That's it. One sentence. And what it does to the output is significant because it changes the process the model uses to arrive at the conclusion, not just the format of what comes back. When AI states an intermediate conclusion, step one, here's what I observe. That conclusion becomes part of the pattern it continues building from. The next step has to be consistent with what came before. A direct answer works differently. All of the reasoning happens silently and you only see the result. When the steps are visible, each one is a commitment. A commitment that's wrong is something you can catch. Errors that would have been buried inside a confident conclusion now surface at the exact step where they occur. That's the mechanism. The reasoning is visible, so the reasoning is reviewable. So, what does that mean in practice? Well, when the steps are in front of you, you can read each one and decide whether the logic holds before you accept the conclusion. You're not stuck evaluating the answer as a whole. You can identify exactly where something broke down. And instead of discarding the entire response and starting over, you can correct one specific step and ask AI to continue from there. That's a fundamentally different kind of interaction. Accepting or rejecting outputs is passive. Engaging with the reasoning, now that's collaboration. Chain of thought prompting makes reasoning visible. That's what it does. The visible steps aren't proof that the logic is sound, they're an opportunity for you to find out. A broken step you can see is far more useful than a broken step that stays hidden. But the technique only does its job if someone is actually reading the steps and evaluating them. AI surfaces the steps. You decide if they hold. A step that sounds logical can still rest on an assumption that you know is wrong. Context the model doesn't have, a number that's off, a constraint it couldn't account for. The visible reasoning is only useful to someone reading it critically. The technique puts the work in front of you, but doing the work is still yours. There's two versions of the same prompt coming. Same situation, same context in both. The only thing that changes is one sentence at the end of the second prompt. Pay attention to what that single addition does to the output, specifically where the difference lives. It's not in the conclusion, it's in everything that produced it. Here's the weak prompt. I run a small landscaping business. I have one employee and we are at capacity most weeks. Revenue has been steady for 8 months, but has not grown. Should I hire a second employee or wait? That's a real question with real stakes. There's context in there, capacity, revenue, timeline, but there's no instruction about how to arrive at the answer. The model is going straight to a conclusion, and whatever reasoning it uses is going to stay invisible. So here's the output. Hiring now makes sense given that you're at capacity. Adding a second employee would let you take on more work and grow revenue. If cash flow is tight, you could wait until you have a larger cushion. Read that and it sounds reasonable. It's well written. It acknowledges a caveat at the end. But ask yourself, what did the model actually weigh to get there? What assumptions is that recommendation resting on? You can't tell. There's nothing to evaluate except the conclusion itself. And if the conclusion is wrong, you have no way to find out why, because the reasoning that produced it was never visible. So here's the strong prompt. I run a small landscaping business. I have one employee and we are at capacity most weeks. Revenue has been steady for 8 months but has not grown. Should I hire a second employee or wait? Work through your reasoning step by step before giving me your answer. Everything is identical except that last sentence. Same scenario, same context, same question. The only change is that the model has been asked to show its work before landing on an answer. Watch what that does. Here's the output. Step 1. At capacity means growth is constrained by labor, not demand. Step 2. 8 months of flat revenue raises a question. Would new capacity generate new revenue or spread the same revenue across higher costs? Step 3. Hiring carries a fixed cost before revenue confirms whether demand can support it. Conclusion. Waiting while actively testing demand is the lower path risk. Now, you have the same conclusion. Wait, but you can see every step that produced it. Step 1 you might agree with immediately. Step 2 is where the analysis gets interesting, and it's exactly where you'd want to pressure test it. Is the market actually there to absorb more capacity, or is demand the real constraint, not labor? Step 3 follows directly from step 2. The conclusion follows from step 3. If step two's assumption is wrong, if the market is more limited than the model assumed, the conclusion probably shifts with it. And now you know exactly where to push back. That was impossible with the first output. You couldn't find the assumptions because you couldn't see the reasoning. Here you can. That's the difference one sentence makes. And the cost of skipping that is that you'd either accept a conclusion you can't evaluate or you'd start from scratch without knowing what broke. Here's the principle to carry forward. A direct answer gives you a conclusion, fast and clean, with the path that produced it staying hidden. A reasoned answer gives you a conclusion and a path. The path is where errors live. Make the path visible, and you have something to work with. Your judgment determines whether that visibility is actually used. The model surfaces the step. Evaluating them, deciding whether the logic holds at each one, is what you bring to the interaction. A step can sound logical and still rest on an assumption you know is wrong. Reading critically is the skill. The technique creates the conditions for it. For any complex or consequential question, a business decision, a recommendation with real stakes, anything where being wrong has a cost, add this to the end of your prompt. Work through your reasoning step by step before giving me your answer. Then, read each step before accepting the conclusion. The conclusion is the last thing to evaluate, not the first. If a step doesn't hold, name it. Tell AI where the reasoning broke and ask it to continue from a corrected version. That's how one sentence turns a black box answer into something you can actually engage with. Every technique in this series builds on the pattern completion framework from the ground up. The more of them you understand, the better your judgment gets, including in situations this series is never going to specifically cover. The prompting templates and resources are over at eauclairai.com. And if you want to work through how any of this applies to your specific business, reach out to us at Eau Claire AI directly. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.